Warning, the following video contains spoilers. If you don't want this episode spoiled for you, switch the video off now.
The Timeshift.
Spoopies! Ghoulies! Things that go bump in the night! No, I'm not describing a trip to the toilet in the middle of the night. I'm describing this episode of Doctor Who! What did you think about this week's episode of Doctor Who? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Let me know in the comment section down below, and I'll get back to you shortly, either directly in the comments themselves or towards the end of next week's video. And be sure to like, favourite, subscribe, click the bell, and do all the YouTube stuff that YouTube wants you to do, because YouTube is an increasingly scary place for small content creators. Support your local small content creator today. It does them a power of good. And so, an episode that we thought was just going to be quote-unquote filler turned out to be something far more substantial to the overall plot of this year's series. I mean, wow. I have to say I really enjoyed this week's episode of Doctor Who. It was a damn fine episode, and probably one of, if not my favourite, Cyberman story of the modern run. High praise indeed, but given how most episodes this season, this whole run of Doctor Who seems to just have them as minions and henchmen for other bad guys, yeah, it's really nice to see an episode where the Cybermen feel like a genuine, legitimate threat. There's something very metamorphic about this week's story. It starts out as a conventional period ghost story type of episode, or as close to a conventional ghost story as Doctor Who really gets, and then over the course of the episode it evolves more into a Cyberman story, and a very, very good one at that. Whilst there were some strong performances, and I find that the twist that this was a Cyberman story to be really fantastic, this is an episode which is not without its flaws. If I'm going to be honest with you, dear listener, I feel that the historical setting was used in a more conventional, post-Hartnell edutainment era, pre-Chibnall era kind of way, where the historical setting feels more like window dressing than it actually does feel like it's trying to inform and educate us about the history and the significance of these people. That's not to say that it didn't do it at all. I think it does it in a far more commendable way than many other historical set episodes. But with that said, I don't feel as though I've learned anything new or anything different about these historical figures. Certainly learned nothing new about them that I didn't already know before. And I'm kind of surprised that they didn't make a bigger deal of Mary Shelly being the mother of science fiction, but I know what would happen if they did that. Speaking of horrifying revelations, I'm gonna be honest with you, I didn't really get the deal with the skeleton. At the end of the episode they hint that there may have been real ghosts in there all along, but what's the whole thing with the skeleton hand and the jumping about skeleton skull? What's that to do with the ghosts or the Cybermen? I'm not sure if it's intending to be intentionally ambiguous or if I didn't really understand what was going on. Also, the deal with the maid still speaking French doesn't make sense either, because the TARDIS would have and should have translated that. Was that due to the Cyberman interfering with things and blocking the signal to the translator who did? I really don't know, and I don't know if that's an intentional bit of foreshadowing or if there's just some major lapse in judgment with how this episode was written. I really don't know. This episode was the episode with the lone Cyberman, and shock horror, the Doctor did the thing that she was told not to do. Oh, I couldn't see that coming a mile off. You know, I'm going to be honest with you though, I did like the moral dilemma that came from it. It felt a lot more tangible and a lot more debatable than we've had with other such moral dilemmas in Doctor Who over the past few years. There's something where you can definitely make a case for both sides of the argument, and in the end it doesn't really feel as though it's been properly resolved, and that whole debate feels as though it's going to rumble on in the background with how certain characters are going to go forward with this series and with the Doctor as a companion. Speaking of Whittaker, I have to say that this has been her best performance of the Doctor, possibly ever. I really loved the speech that she did give in the cellar. It was perfectly written and pitch perfectly delivered. It's one of those rare times that I can genuinely say that she is the Doctor and make it not feel phony or fake to me. And I like more of that. I really would like more of that. I would like it when her Doctor is a lot more angsty and bitter. It suits her right down to the ground. It really suits her performance style, and it would help to make her Doctor her own. The Cyberman was great. I really love the new design that they are teasing. I still prefer the 80s design. It felt a lot more, well, real. It felt a lot more practical, even if it was incredibly cheap. I do love the new voice. It does have a great 80s throwback to it. It's deeper, it's scary, it's almost faintly demonic in a kind of way, which really makes them feel a lot more intimidating than the robotic delete words that I just, yeah, no. The Cybermen don't need a catchphrase, they just need to be scary, and this makes them a lot more scary. Yeah, his performance was incredibly hammy, but hammy in a way which suits the show really well. It's good to see a Cyberman with some degree of personality. They weren't always as cold and as emotional as the modern run suggests it. Certainly in the 80s run, they seem to have a little bit more personality to them, or at least the Cyber Controllers seem to. And to have anything that makes it more like that, more like the Cybermen that I grew up with, I'm really okay with. I'm going to be honest with you, I really did for a few minutes think that it was going to be Tim Shaw as a Cyberman, and I did panic a little bit. And I did, before I forget it, really like the call back to Bill Potts and her fate, and I hope that's going to end up building into something else. The companions in this week's story were great. I feel as though they were genuinely contributing to the story and the adventure itself, rather than being passive observers. This is probably the best performance we've seen as Bradley Walsh as Graham this season. That's mostly because I felt that he's been AFK and they've been writing him more like Bradley Walsh than they have with Graham. That's not to say I don't like Bradley Walsh, but this season he has certainly felt rather AFK to me. Mandip Gill as Yaz was great. Would have liked to see more of her, but that seems to be just the general rule of thumb going forward just about every episode of Doctor Who that she's in. It was nice of her to see seemingly use a little bit more of a police training, a little bit more of a deduction kind of thing to see where people were going and try and understand stuff. And Toshin Cole as Ryan, this is probably one of his better performances. He feels a lot more genuine, a lot more sweet, more like a guy you'd like to know, which is really great, and I like the fact he seems to be wanting to butt heads with the Doctor, but doesn't want to. He's definitely rethinking his positioning with this travellings with the Doctor, which I can really get behind. It'll be interesting to see exactly what happens with him going forward. I imagine that if he leaves, chances are Graham will leave as well, but we'll soon see about that. Anyway, with all that said, let's quickly go into the overview, because time is getting on, to give you my overall thoughts of the series, or rather the episode as a whole. Okay, so now the overview, just a very quick one, because I think you can kind of guess what I'm going to say with this. This was a fantastic story, which whilst I don't feel as though it used its time period or its historical characters quite to its fullest, and it didn't really educate us quite as much as I wanted to, this is still an episode that has a lot of flair and a lot of personality to it. It was suitably spooky and creepy, even if I would rather that it was a little bit more done to make it even creepier. I think the whole idea of this house constantly folding in itself and relocating people to different parts of it was a great idea, but I think that it was just done in a kind of cheap way. Particularly that bit where it was Byron and the Doctor in that room, and the Doctor kept walking off to the right, but then would walk back in on the right. I would have thought if they're going to do something about that, maybe she walks in on the right but comes in on the left, or walks in at the right and comes from centre screen. That would have made for a lot more of an interesting twist. It would have made it feel a lot better, rather than just, right, Whittaker, walk off stage. No, walk on stage. Walk off stage. Walk off stage. Just small little camera tricks would really have made this a lot more interesting, but I can't complain too much. But anyway, what about you, dear listener? What do you think about this week's episode of Doctor Who? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Let me know in the comment section down below, and I'll get back to you shortly, either directly in the comments themselves or towards the end of next week's video. Be sure to like, favourite, subscribe, click the bell, and do all the YouTube stuff that YouTube wants you to do, and that kind of a deal, because YouTube is a small, hairy place for small content creators. Support your local small content creator today, and let me know what you think is going to happen next week. What the big mystery is going to be with the timeless child and all that malarkey. Are the leaks going to be true and it's going to be something horrifying, or is it going to be something interesting and revolutionary? We'll soon find out. Thank you for listening, and goodbye!